And I also remember talking to investors. Investors did not get cybersecurity at all. And I had this one slide, the gloom and doom slide, where I said, well, if you don't have cybersecurity, you have loss of financial data, loss of customer data. And then at the very bottom, I had also disruption or destruction. And at the time, this was pre-ransomware, so it sounded like just really far-fetched. But I knew that was coming because you can see the storm in the distance.
There's often not enough money for cybersecurity, quote unquote, beforehand, but after an attack or after something happens, there's an infinite amount of cash that flows, so it's either complete feast or it's absolute famine.
Sometimes folks, they're just so focused on the more glamorous aspects of cybersecurity, of protect and detect and respond, that they just skip over that first step, or they just throw their hands up and say, "Look, I don't know what we have. We're trying to protect everything, but it's just this massive environment. It's chaotic. It's complex. I don't know."
Welcome to the Disciplined Troublemakers Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Shagory. Here on DT, we talk about scaling great tech companies and helping founder CEOs to grow with greater ease and flow. Today, we'll be talking with Roselle Safran. Roselle is the CEO and founder of KeyCaliber, a cybersecurity company focused on MSSPs and enterprise customers. Previously, she was the CEO and co-founder of Uplevel Security, an incident response platform that was acquired by McAfee. Her past experience includes leading cybersecurity operations at the Executive Office of the President during the Obama administration and managing analysis teams at the Department of Homeland Security, now CISA. She's a frequent speaker on cybersecurity and entrepreneurship issues and holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in engineering from Princeton University. Roselle, thank you for carving out time to talk with us on Disciplined Troublemakers, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, no, it's always nice to have somebody who is local to me, and the more we've chatted offline before, just to catch up and learn more about what you guys are doing. So I think just for a little bit of context to start and kick things off, going back to the very beginning of KeyCaliber, which you've had now founded about 8 or 9 years ago, what was the specific frustration point at that moment in time that had you thinking, someone has to fix this, someone has to build this differently than what other people are doing in the marketplace?
Yeah, so I spent many years as a practitioner before becoming an entrepreneur. And what I saw time and time again was that the security teams, they just have way too much work to do. There's just no way that they're going to get to everything. And beyond that, there's often this disconnect between what the security team is doing and what really matters from a business perspective. And I wanted to be able to bring both of those concepts together. And the way to do that is to first understand what's most important to the business. What are the critical assets and business applications, business processes that the business needs to keep up and running? If there's going to be a ransomware attack, they're the ones that can't get hit because you're going to lose revenue, you're not going to be able to operate. And I wanted to be able to understand what that was and have that information available to the security team. Because then the security team could prioritize everything that they were working on based on that limited set of the critical aspects of the company, critical assets, critical business processes, critical applications. And that would then give the team the ability to prioritize and make their workload reasonable. And it would allow security operations to connect directly to business operations.
Yeah, no, it is one of those things where it's very easy, given the super technical nature of cyber and your work, as you've shared it with me offline. It's just so easy to get consumed with that, obviously focus on it, be communicating in that way, say one's maturity posture or, a million other things, and not be disconnected from the business outcomes, but just not be connected to it in a way that allows you to share your story or with the cybersecurity story and the risks and what the team is doing and working, 90 hours a week or more to actually solve some really critical challenges, but it never gets shared in the way that's helpful to a finance team or to the strategy team or whatever that composition of that particular business unit or whatnot looks like. Is that a fair statement in terms of what you guys and you and KeyCaliber face every day, or is it a case where you've been successful in making that business case or having that business case be front and center? Because I think a lot of cyber firms struggle here, and so if you've got some insight and tips, that's always welcome. That's for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely an ongoing need to be able to articulate the value of the security program in terms that non-security folks understand, in terms that leadership, the board, the CFO, CEO understand. And because you could say, well, we took care of CVE, X, Y, and Z, and this particular threat actor was targeting it, and you get all into the jargon of the industry, and it just causes non-security folks to just glaze over. They don't get it, and when you're talking from that perspective, then it just doesn't resonate as providing value in the same way, where if you can say, look, we had some major risks that were related to our critical business applications, which keeps our revenue flowing. And we've addressed that. So now we have less risk of that, and so less risk of our revenue not flowing. That makes sense to someone who doesn't understand security. But having that bridge has before KeyCaliber, there wasn't a way to do that in an automated fashion. Like you can maybe go and talk to folks in different business units and ask them, okay, what are your critical functions? And then try to map back to the assets. And it's a whole jumbled mess. And beyond that, it takes months and months. You get a lot of errors and omissions. You get folks with their ulterior motives. Like sometimes we've heard all these crazy stories where folks will say, well, we did this whole process and we would get folks saying this is critical, but that was just because they wanted more funding for their department or wanted their department to seem important. Or on the flip side, there was something that was obviously critical, and the department didn't want to call it that because then they knew they would have to deal with extra security controls. And so and you go through that whole process, you get all this data which has its inaccuracies in it, and then by the time you've collected all of it, it's stale. So that whole manual process just doesn't work for a variety of reasons. And that's why I wanted to have it automated and in the hands of the security team. Because sometimes those kinds of surveys and questionnaires, they're done, but by maybe the risk team or some other team. And that information just doesn't end up flowing to the security team. And it really needs to be something front and center that the security team knows about, because that becomes their North Star.
Yeah. No, I think it's always fascinating internally, particularly with large organizations that, you have a lot of experience with, where, again, those internal mechanisms, to put it politely, are such that whoever might be the driving force behind it, is it risk and risk management? Is it the CTO? Is it something else? Or is it really a strategic imperative? And I always find, despite the conversations around the technical aspects of a maturity stance, that real maturity is when it's considered to be a strategic asset that is cybersecurity. And then number two, there's either someone very high in the organization, so the CISA or whoever the security person is going to be reports, either the CEO, either the COO potentially, but that it's interesting to me how that kind of dynamic ends up working to either short circuit what you've just described, or just to lay down a mandate as to what that's going to look like and how one communicates to different, at the C-level, tier 1, tier 2, or potentially tier 3, where it's operationally very significant in terms of day-to-day operations and stuff, where it's, opening up the wrong email attachment and just being aware of that type of stuff. I just think sometimes is often missed until it's very much too late. And as you and many other practitioners know, there's often not enough money for cybersecurity, quote unquote, beforehand, but after an attack or after something happens, there's an infinite amount of cash that flows. So it's either complete feast or it's absolute famine for teams like yourself or internal teams or whatever that posture looks like. It's just, it's just typically very unfortunate, and people have to learn that lesson the hard way.
Yeah. There's definitely less of that now than when I had my first startup. Because I remember back when I had my first startup, I definitely had to explain why cybersecurity as a function was needed. And I also remember talking to investors. Investors did not get cybersecurity at all. And I had this one slide, the gloom and doom slide, where I said, well, if you don't have cybersecurity, you have like loss of financial data, loss of customer data. And then at the very bottom, I had also disruption or destruction. And at the time, this was pre-ransomware, so it sounded like just really far-fetched. But I knew that was coming because you can see the storm in the distance, and just understanding how adversaries were evolving and just the direction of the industry. I knew it was going to get to a point where it was going to be beyond just, okay, this is an issue of confidentiality, but more of integrity, availability. And it's obviously certainly moved in that direction with ransomware being as prolific as it is today. And I remember thinking at the time, confidentiality, like if you lose data, it's sometimes very hard to see because you may not even realize it. I mean, now a lot of times it ends up on the dark web, and there are all these companies that are monitoring the dark web. But back 15 years ago, you lost data, you didn't know about it. I mean, sure, the cybersecurity experts could tell you, look, we saw this go out the door to XYZ adversary. And sometimes there would be concern, but sometimes there'd be, how do you know that? Or, so what are they going to do with my data? And so it wasn't as tangible as the situations where you have now, where your operations stopped. Not only did they stopped for 5 weeks. Now you've got big problems. And so it's a very different scenario. And I remember thinking back, this is like 2014, my previous startup, where I would talk about that, and it sounded like so extreme at the time, but that's the reality today.
Yeah, no, it's true, and we're very accustomed to it now. I mean, it makes front page or front page news there. I always think of, as a car fan, I think of last October, Jaguar Land Rover, or JLR, where they were shut down for really almost 2 months as a result of a very extensive attack, and it shut them down in very significant ways, losing billions and billions of dollars, and was considered a national security risk. So it's quite a big deal, and even with sophisticated players, I would presume that JLR and Tata, that sits above them, has a sophisticated security posture, and yet nevertheless, stuff like that does happen. Yeah, thinking about it a little bit more, for when you've got someone who is or should be your ideal customer, maybe they don't realize it quite yet. What problem are you solving that they are currently either misdiagnosing or possibly misunderstanding? Because there's a lot of, I think, still misunderstanding around what it is that someone might be needing to solve for. They've got a false set of assumptions around what security might be to them. Is that something you and the team still face today here in 2026?
Well, So the way that our technology works, it's basically the foundational layer of, you need to know what you have, what's most critical, where you have gaps in your security posture, and what are the biggest exposures to deal with. So it's really the base layer of, you need to, if you look at NIST CSF, identify, get your lay of the land. And sometimes we see folks where they think they can skip that step and go right to the more glamorous side of, well, we need to figure out what we're detecting. But if you look at NIST CSF and you shape it more as a pyramid, which I like to do, as opposed to just having it linearly across, the bottom layer is identify. You get that squared away, then you build on top of it of protect. So you know what you have, then you protect it. If you know what you have and you're protecting it, then the next step is detect, and you're going to have less to detect because you've done a good job of shoring up your defenses and being proactive. And you'll have less to detect, and that means there'll be less that you need to respond to and recover from. And so it all fits together. But sometimes folks, they're just so focused on the more glamorous aspects of cybersecurity, of protect and detect and respond, that they just skip over that first step. Or they just throw their hands up and say, look, I don't know what we have. Like, well, we're trying to protect everything, but it's just this massive environment. It's chaotic. It's complex. I don't know. So sometimes we see that, but there's definitely a maturity in the market in general where most organizations are starting to understand. It begins with, what do I have? What's most critical? Where are my gaps? And then you build off of there.
Yeah, no, I think it is not the sexy piece, but it's the absolute essential piece. And it's not just about cybersecurity. It's also about really just visibility into your business and into your network. I talk with people in, the finance function and CFOs, and they oftentimes don't have full visibility into their function, that the company doesn't know where all of their data is. They don't have a real locked down chart of accounts. And what's interesting, I think, about what's unfolding relative to AI is that your digital foundation, if I can call it that, whether it is the asset, it's the data that's sitting on top of that, where that is as an agentic set of systems is either put in place or prototyped, you find out very, very quickly what it is you actually have and don't. And a lot of organizations are really struggling. And whether you come at it or start from a security standpoint, it's a finance standpoint, it's just an ops standpoint. Where's our physical stuff? It's been fascinating to listen to people and the challenges that they face, where they actually know a lot less about what it is that they truly have, where it is, not even whether it's secure, but what is the actual inventory. It's why I think some of those real foundational steps, as unexciting, quote unquote, as they might be, we'll get to the glamorous stuff with, wearing your superhero cape, is really essential. And yet it's something that often gets overlooked over and over again. So, and you're nodding your head. So yeah, it's just, we humans don't change too much in terms of how we look at some of those challenges.
Yep. I mean, we see it all the time. Like, we'll come in and there'll just be a lot of assets that folks didn't know they had, like a lot of shadow IT. And now, and we're also handling AI related use cases as well now. And so we see lots of shadow AI. An organization will have approved use of, say, Copilot or Gemini, but then we see the usage of ChatGPT and Olala, all these other ones that were not approved, but someone in the organization said, hey, this will be handy, and it's getting used. And so we're surfacing that now also, because it's a big part of visibility.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of people under pressure to get work done, burn tokens as it's still sexy here in the middle part of 2026, even if it's burning cash. And if you're going to be measured on, those metrics, then you're going to go ahead and take those activities. I'm a big fan of Charlie Munger, and he always says, show me an incentive and I'll show you an outcome. And it's not hard to see why people would do that. They want to protect themselves, and they're nervous, and they're not always sure. No, absolutely. I'm not surprised to hear that, and I think that'll be true for quite a long period of time too, as people get in air quotes creative about how they try and solve genuine problems and protect themselves in their business unit.
Yeah. And so we've actually started, because there's a need for it, we're starting to do some security awareness training on AI. Because for just as you're saying, with many people, they're not trying to do something that from a security perspective is risky. They're just trying to get their work done and get it done in the most efficient way possible. And if that means, that they're going to throw everything into ChatGPT because then they can get that report done on time with a tight deadline, then they're going to do it. Yeah, they're not thinking about it from the perspective of, what am I actually dumping into ChatGPT here? Is this something that's sensitive? And so now we're starting to do those trainings because part of it is just awareness. People they're not thinking from that perspective. They're only security folks look at everything through the lens of security before.
So true.
Yep. Everyone else is like, I'm just skipping to, I need to get this done, and security often just doesn't come into the equation at all.
Yeah, no. As I'm fond of saying, humans are an interesting species. They often want to feel safe, but don't actually wish to be safe. And under pressure, in the moment, that, in air quotes, rational decision to get that thing done so that you're on time with your team and, again, quote unquote, stay out of trouble, often leads to behaviors that can, in retrospect or with the benefit of a little bit of time or distance, look less than optimal. That's for sure. But under pressure, humans, which we don't always do very well, it lends itself right now to all of that without really thinking a step ahead, let alone 2 or 3 steps ahead. Yeah, no. I think an enormously valuable tip for anyone out there to just think that through and take a deep breath and ask, is this the best course or wisest course of action? Yeah. Where do you find in the marketplace, is there a particular either group or challenge that you face where the market consistently either undervalues or maybe oversimplifies what you guys do at KeyCaliber? Is there, assuming you're comfortable sharing, what is that? And if so, what does that look like?
Sometimes we run into prospective customers who think they can do it themselves. And sometimes they try doing it themselves and then come back 6 months later because it sounds easier than it is. They think, well, putting together an inventory, how hard is that? I've got my EDR, I've got my vulnerability scanner, just add those two together there. I've got all my assets. And it is not that simple. The whole deduplication process is a headache unto itself. And so trying to do that in a spreadsheet is virtually impossible. Not to mention the fact you're doing it in a spreadsheet, everything is changing, while you're munging the data. And even just looking at 2 products, that's still not the full spectrum. Part of why we're able to identify shadow IT so easily is we're looking at traffic data. So we're seeing what's transversing, having a conversation that EDR doesn't see at all, vulnerability scanner doesn't see at all. Especially with any product that requires an agent, you first have to know that it's there. And they don't know it's there because it's not being scanned. And if it's not being scanned, then putting that into your spreadsheet and thinking you've got an accurate inventory is still wrong. So we have come across organizations that think they can do it themselves. Um, and then some of them try and realize that they made a bad mistake trying to do it. And there's still a technology component to it. So even if you feasibly did have the time and the resources to build something internally, is that the best use of the security team's time and effort and resources? Like, probably not. Is it something that needs to be done? Absolutely. It's foundational. But does it need to be done by your security team and take away from doing that protection, detection, response? Probably not, unless you've got folks sitting around with spare cycles, and most don't.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I've spoken with with a number of CEOs on the podcast where it's been not dissimilar. Obviously, different verticals and so forth, but my personal favorite is the CEO of Upload Care, where I said, who's your ideal client? He said, a seasoned CTO or one who's on his second or her second startup. I said, why is that? He said, well, the first time they think they can upload, billions of, tons and tons of files for what they do. And he said this, then they realize what the overhead is, how much effort is involved, how easy it is to make a mistake, how, an end user might upload kiddie porn or do all sorts of malicious things. And the second time they figure, I'm never doing that again. And so he said I always talk with, the CTO who's on his or her second rodeo, and that's the way to do that. How do you guys go ahead because I think this will be really helpful to other teams. Purple Finch Group helps technology CEOs innovating at the edge of chaos create operational fitness across their technology stack and team of talent. Achieving significant and measurable scale, selling your story, and finding time to think and plan can feel like a bridge too far. So if you're a CEO whose company has found product market fit, but is struggling, or you're a CEO whose company is looking to accelerate existing momentum, we can help with proven blueprints for optimal scale. Shifting from incremental addition to exponential multiplication can be absolutely achieved with less effort and stress. To get in touch, I can be reached at Scott with 2 T's at purplefinchgroup.com. Now, back to the interview. How do you go ahead and, I guess, price that misunderstanding or share that with a team, either because they've got the scar tissue now and it will listen, or is it a case where you've been able to quantify that in some way with, again, what you're comfortable sharing with? Because I do think that would be helpful to other teams to help as a frame or as a way of moving forward to try and essentially define that cost of inaction, which is probably very significant.
So we try to just keep our pricing very simple. And so we don't get into that side of it. We just say, look, how many employees you have in your organization, and we just calculate accordingly. It would make sense to price by number of assets, but when you do that, then you run into the potential for a lot of dispute, because we always find the assets that they didn't know they had. They could think they have 23,000 assets, and then we come in and say, actually it's 26,000 assets. Like, we found this whole subnet you didn't even realize, or maybe it was part of an acquisition that you thought was already counted, but it's not. There's so many reasons why an organization may not have the right number and may be wildly off. And because that's the case, we don't want to charge by the number of assets, because then folks say, no, what are you talking about? We have 26,000 assets. I counted 23,000 in my spreadsheet or in my CMDB, which was updated, 3 years ago. Or there's always something it's just way off, because if they had been doing it before, it was in this manual, laborious process, or just some other janky process that was not getting the true count.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. Yeah, it's sort of like being an author getting paid by the word or something like that by your publishing house. There's obviously perceived incentives there, even if there's enormous amounts of value. And it's fascinating to me how people will anchor around a particular number or a set of data because they've owned it and needed to go ahead and do that, as opposed to saying, here's what we're seeing, what are you seeing, and actually having found an additional 3,000 assets or 5 or whatever the number is welcomed. But most of the time that is not a welcoming conversation to have. And therefore, yeah, there's a lot of friction that gets created there. Yeah, it's just, again, back to incentives and how people are measured, how they are rewarded or punished within their team and stuff for quote unquote either not doing their job or finding somebody to help them basically optimize for that and protect the organization. So, yeah, the risk profiles are always a fascinating topic to me in terms of how the human capital gets deployed. Yeah. Going ahead and I guess maybe shifting gears a little bit here, is there, as the founder and CEO, is there, personal work that you enjoy that you need to somehow protect? Because if it gets crowded out, either you feel less energized or less, I would even maybe say motivated, that there's a way of kind of strategically protecting the work that you enjoy most, because some things aren't ideal, but other things people really typically enjoy. Offline, I know you enjoy being a builder, and so I'm wondering, as you carve out time, but there's lots of pressure to do other things with the short amount of time that we all have, how do you, if you do, how do you protect that time for what is most energizing for you?
That's a great question. I could probably be better at this, because I'm always focused on, okay, what's gonna move the needle the most, and most of that is energizing, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a lot of herding cats. So it really depends on what's happening. I do, though. I really enjoy having conversations with customers and prospective customers and learning about their problems and solutionizing, figuring out how we could be helpful. And that is a big part of moving the needle, because that is part of the sales process. So I actually like doing that side of the sales process. The back and forth of, okay, now we've got to redline the contract 12 times. Like that's the not exciting part. But actually solving problems, I really enjoy. And yes, I do really enjoy building. And we made a tough decision at the beginning of the year to completely refactor our whole product to make it AI native. And the whole thinking was, we're gonna go slow to go fast. And we've rebuilt the product and created a whole AI infrastructure for how we build. And so now we're at the point where I can take part in some of the building, and that's super exciting. Obviously I'm doing my coding with Claude, and anything that I produce still gets CTO review, thorough review before it goes into prod. But now when I think of something and I'm going through the demo and I'm thinking, this would be cool to have, or I'm having a conversation while doing the demo and I get some good feedback, now I could start to add it into the product myself. And that is super fun. And I will say there have been days where I've just gotten so into building that some of the other activities have been put on the back burner, because I'm just having fun building.
Yeah, no, again, with folks that I know, a very similar story, particularly for those who are building where they have, if in the CEO seat, been essentially pulled away from that. They'll do a little bit of it on weekends or something, or carve out time from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. when everyone else in the household is asleep. But it is, the new LLM platforms have allowed for just a complete rewrite, no pun intended, for what is actually possible, which is super cool. But it's always the temptation to get pulled into something just exciting, and you just get to really enjoy it. And if the impetus is a demo or a sales call in some way, shape, or form, hey, that feature set or this use case, it's at the one hand exciting. It's just, I think a lot of people try to, again, you could call it struggle, but it could also be very much, what does one go ahead and balance, that type of set of activities for being excited and doing stuff and having, as you do, and many others, really great hard skills as well to be able to then really kind of turbocharge some of the activities. And I think maybe as a follow-up question, what was the desire to shift now to a native AI platform, both to position for growth for the future, to jump ahead of most others in terms of what it is you're doing, combined with being able to help others too in their journey by having done it yourself? What was if you're open to sharing again, the decision to do that hard lifting, to take that financial hit and the activities and stuff that could have been spent elsewhere, to do it in Q1 or part of Q2 of 2026 versus, say, later this year or with some other tools that might be forthcoming?
Well, for us, when we decided to rebuild, we actually erased years of tech debt. And that in and of itself made it worthwhile, because that tech debt, it was becoming a blocker for getting new functionality in. And it just ended up creating additional tech debt. You build a workaround to deal with the issue, and then you need another workaround to deal with that workaround, and you end up with this just never-ending cycle of piling up tech debt, and it just was not serving our purpose. And so just revamping from the ground floor allowed us to get rid of all of that. But beyond that, now anything we build, we can build so much more quickly than we had in the past. So it was a multi-factor reasoning behind why we should make the move. And the tools are available now, and we wanted to seize the moment before the tokens get really expensive. So I think the timing was really solid on that one.
Yeah, no, I can't. Again, it's always a challenge, and you highlight token cost and the forthcoming reset and ongoing reset of the pricing and so forth. Not to mention the price of talent, the K breakdown of those who are getting a lot more expensive and those who are not getting more expensive and so forth. Any tips or things that you might recommend people think about if they're going to embark on that themselves, where they do have a certain number of years of existing infrastructure, we'll call it accumulated tech debt and ongoing workarounds? Any best practices or recommendations that you might have?
Well, it all starts with the architecture, and that was part of what we ended up doing when we did our refactor. Was we had learned from our mistakes with the architectural decisions we had made early on that had basically come back to bite us. And so we were able to just do a reset and get the architecture right. For most companies, they're not going to be able to just start from a blank slate again. And so it's going to be a more thoughtful process of how to go from the current architecture to the one that you ideally want to get to, and how to do it in stages. And so that becomes a more challenging project because you're swapping out over time, but thinking through where you want to get to, so at least you're marching in the right direction, is the approach that you have to take. Because if you're just making short-term decisions of, oh well, let's just swap out this, but not thinking how is this all going to come together in 3 years when we've done all the swapping, is it going to be something that works together well, that it's like a well-oiled machine, or is this going to be a whole discombobulated train wreck? And so, and there's a lot in between that. So it really comes down to having a very thorough and thoughtful process of figuring out where do you want to get to architecturally. And I think that from the perspective of AI in general, architecture is so critical because it can do a lot of the tactical work of putting it together, but you first got to tell it what to build, and you have to have those clear blueprints, because it'll build something, but if you don't have those clear blueprints, what you're going to get at the end may not function anywhere near the way you expect it to.
Yeah, we certainly see on, at least I do anyway, on a variety of social media platforms, you can climb that ladder that much more efficiently, but it just means if you're climbing the wrong ladder, you've basically walked into a sky that is just not going to serve you well. When it comes to what's going to unfold for you guys, or plans that you have, growth opportunities over the next 12 to 18 months or so, have you guys been able to define what that looks like given the re-architect and everything that you've done here in the first, we'll call it first quarter of the new year? Or is it a case of really trying to understand the markets and the market shifts and so forth that have really kind of unfolded? I'm curious how you guys see the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, so we have already started to add in new capabilities to address what we're seeing is going to be a big need in the next year, 2 years. And that starts with getting the picture of the organization's AI landscape. And so we've started adding in those capabilities, and we're going to be continually building on those. That's one of the areas that we're really digging into. And we have some other exciting plans for what we've been wanting to incorporate into the technology for a while, but it just couldn't with the tech debt, and now we can. And then we have one or two ideas that we're still trying to get an understanding if the market is there for it. They're exciting capabilities. I'd like to dig into them because they're interesting. I know that they have value, but we still need to get better feedback from the market as to whether there's the demand for it right now, or whether there will be in 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, and that's very fair. It's both exciting and unclear in some cases as to what's going to resonate with the audiences or the client segments that one is focused on. There's so much hype, excitement, and terror at the same time that the result is sometimes people not being able to make a decision or not being able to find that clarity. And as a result, they just simply aren't able to decide. And the safest thing to do in uncertainty often, as I like to share with others, is not to make any decision at all, to basically kick that can to do, what is necessary. I don't want to call it quite the basic minimum, but basically always have the shield up and always be ready to protect oneself, or at least that's the perception there. Are these, with, again, what you're comfortable sharing, would these be new markets, or are these based on skill sets that you and the team have, or is it a perception of serving your existing, MSSP and other enterprise clients more deeply or in new ways? What does that kind of look like for you guys, or what are you thinking would work and what you're seeing in terms of signal out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, we're doubling down on our existing customer base. So basically, if we're selling direct, we're selling to mid-market and enterprise. But yeah, as you mentioned, we also work with MSSPs, some MSPs that are transitioning to becoming MSSPs, and security consultants. And so we're just providing more and more that serves those audiences, as opposed to switching into new markets.
Yeah, no, and that seems fair. You guys, as you shared with me, maybe about a month ago or so, give or take, was the first component of an ebook that you have, which is really kind of nice as a way of sharing with audiences that with a more, if I can call it this, modest security posture, or just understanding what it is to think about as it relates to security, I think is just, super, super powerful and very meaningful, because there is still a lot of confusion around cyber, around what that means, how to prioritize it, what it should look like, regardless of where one is in size and growth and so forth. So, I just think there's a lot of opportunity out there just to share with people and to build clarity and decision, even if it is at a foundational level as to what matters and why it does, so that you're obviously already educating an audience and they feel, wow, KeyCaliber has my back, and I understand what it is they're doing and why they're doing it and where it matters, so that I feel not just safer, but I feel better educated and I can just make a better decision. Which I think many just get paralyzed by all the detailed jargon and just can't figure it out. And as you say, or said earlier, with the specialty language, just glaze over completely. And we're all familiar with that. Law, medicine, many other disciplines too do the same thing. And it's just overwhelming. I think sometimes this space in particular is very overwhelming in ways that people just can't wrap their heads or hands around. They can't kind of hug it, if you will. And as a result, just, struggle. And I think you guys probably, you guys see that all the time, if that's fair.
Yeah. And that's something that's, it's just a challenge for our industry and many industries. I think it's just getting to the common vernacular where folks understand what you're talking about. And I do lots of webinars and presentations on cybersecurity, and I always try to keep the language at a level where someone who's maybe they're a manager or somehow involved in security, they understand it, and it's not just a bunch of acronyms that folks are not going to necessarily get, and when they don't get it, then the rest of that sentence is lost as well. And it's tough for a lot of security folks because they're just used to talking in that language, and I know because I used to be like that when I was a practitioner. So I understood. I talk like that. As a practitioner, I was very focused on the security lens, saw the world from that lens, and that was how my mindset worked. But I've since learned that you've got to take it a step back and make it something that is more commonly understood.
Yeah, no, I think too. When you think about disciplines such as cyber, could be law, could be medicine, could be many, many others, technology in general, the currency underneath that is competence. And what is competence? It's basically being able to demonstrate consistently to, your own colleagues, essentially, that you genuinely understand it. And because cybersecurity is so technical and involves so many different subsets and stuff, it's why everyone has, a million acronyms or labels after their name, and they still feel as though they haven't really mastered it yet. It's just, it's tough to come up for air, I think, basically. And because there isn't a broader understanding like there is, I think, for law and medicine, where you can say to someone, hey, just give me the 5-year-old version of this, please, and not feel inadequate for doing so. Whereas I think in cyber, still people feel, outsiders anyway, still feel a lot of pressure to be on top of it in some way, or to demonstrate that they kind of get it, that they have that insider instinct in some way, so they feel safe. They feel safe. It's just kind of a fundamental human desire there. Yeah. Well, if listeners have, or are wrestling with some of these challenges and whatnot, how would you like them to reach out to you? What would be the best way to go ahead and follow up with you?
Well, welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I spend a decent amount of time on LinkedIn, or email me, Roselle at KeyCaliber.com. Check out our website, KeyCaliber.com. And happy to chat. If there's, like I said, I enjoy coming up with solutions. So if there's a challenge that's related to what we can help with, then very happy to talk. And even if it's something that KeyCaliber can't help with, I could still share my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nope. That is perfectly fair. I think what stands out for me today in terms of our conversation is just, the importance of kind of knowing where you're going and who you are, the trade-offs that you guys made earlier in the year to go AI native, and then just to choose to really go ahead and either spread the wings or to double down on your existing customers. Because I think in the cybersecurity space and in technology in general, there's a lot that people could go ahead and do. And while that discipline doesn't always look terribly dramatic, as you discussed earlier in the session, it's usually what helps keep companies whole and gives them that North Star that allows them to really kind of gain that hard-won success. So, really thank you for those insights, and thank you for sharing here on the Disciplined Troublemakers Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and folks, we will be back with another episode of the Disciplined Troublemakers very soon. Cheers. Thank you for tuning into the Disciplined Troublemakers Podcast, and we hope you found the episode valuable. If you did, please subscribe to the Disciplined Troublemakers Podcast on your favorite platform and leave a review. Putting this podcast together is a group effort, so I'd like to provide a shout out to Heartcast Media and their team for all of the assistance they provide with each episode. If you want to get in touch with me directly, I can be reached at Scott with 2 T's at purplefinchgroup.com. Purple Finch Group is the sponsor of this podcast. We have another podcast episode out very shortly. Stay tuned.